Continuing, if you recall where we left off, I threw in right at the tail end that certainty certainly is a surcease for ordinary minds. And since we ended there, let me just pick it up for tonight and ask if you can see that this is indicative of a kind of intellectual fanaticism. You recall we were talking about last time. And a kind of intellectual fanaticism is the norm. It is the healthy norm. This gets no, of course, verbal recognition in this way. And if anybody had ever said anything, which I could dig out something surely in history that somebody had gotten close to it, even if it was just one of the monkeys with 1,000 typewriters trying to rewrite Milton. Not Shakespeare. You keep hearing Shakespeare. They're trying to rewrite Milton. And what scares me is they might damn well succeed. But just one man's fear. It is not normally pointed out in those words. But another way to look at this kind of norm, this healthy norm of an intellectual fanaticism being the nature of the secondary world, is that under ordinary conditions, the more submissive are the submissive, the better. All right. How about this? The health, the vitality, the rate of continuing growth of life is so relentless that it's the secondary world, the secondary intellectual world of man. And that alone, the more civilized you are, it is that seems to offer some stability and some certainty. Now, once you're civilized enough, as it's easy enough to paint over and over, once you're civilized enough to will assume anyone who sees this, that you've got a TV, you've got a VCR, or if you can't do any better, you had to show up here in person. But I know you're trying. So if you're that civilized, then you're civilized enough to meet any qualifications that I'm using now. So once you're civilized, the certainty of being fed, the certainty of having a place to stay tonight, the certainty of getting laid, with most of you, is no longer even a matter of certainty. It is not a matter of people sitting around worrying about where the next meal, where the next dry place is coming from. There's no doubt we're still talking about the kind of absolutely, why should I have to point out the ridiculous? Primary, minimal conditions to stay alive. No, and it's not be part of the Bee Gees. You have to eat. You have to eat. You have to get in out of the weather, and etc. So at the primary level, I notice every time I have occasion to see TV and I see these guys selling religion and mail order courses and real estate, I don't hear the audience laughing at them. Well, make a note of that. Of course, wait a minute. I believe those audiences are set up. Well, never mind. I was just verbally pointing out that which should not even have to be pointed out. You do understand there is an absolute certainty that's ridiculous. It is beyond the pale of any reasonable definition of the word moot to even have to say, well, look, hey, you got to eat, stay alive. You got to get out of the condition and stay alive. So you can say, well, you certainly do. But that's no longer certainty. If that's all there was to life, to a secondary, driven, sophisticated man or woman like all of you are, if that's all there was to life, you would be suffering from extreme, damn near terminal ennui and boredom, to the point that it could be, this is no consequence, but it could apparently lead into what could be from afar seen to be some kind of neuroses. In other words, you would just be sick of living. It would mean nothing if that's all you were up to. So that's not the question of certainty. It is the secondary world. Now forget all that. The primary, the minimal requirements to survive. It is now this, all the world of the mind, the arts, the sciences, everything that is beyond, everything that grows out of the primary basic needs. Beyond that, you have the secondary world, and it is there. Forget the primary now and look at it another way. It is like a whole new level. And inasmuch as you have this relentless, continual press of change, in some quarters known as progress. For 50 cents, you can get two versions of it. It is this kind of relentless change, the uncertainty of the future. And the more civilized you are, you cannot, of course, escape what appears to be the external consequences any more than a fish can the water. But it appears to be at times, according to whether you think you're looking out there or whether you think you're looking at your own thoughts. But it is, the more civilized you are, the more you would feel, just an ordinary person, the more you would feel this kind of unyielding pressure. Withal, if you were living in some more rural, feral circumstances in New Zealand, in somewhere, if you were not right in the mainstream, much less the front ranks of civilization right now, you would not feel that kind of relentless, not in the secondary sense, push. You would still have to get up and find food and keep your hut roof patched and etc. But insofar as this feeling, sometimes known as the gray flannel suit syndrome or the rat race, or this trying to stay up with the Joneses and the Rosenblatts are driving me crazy. That kind of relentless push is, in a sense, the nature, it is the breath, it is the reality of the secondary world. What appears to be a kind of surcease from that is this thing simultaneously, or whenever it has occasion to, feeling as though, well, wait a minute, there is some certainty here. Wait a minute, let me get my bearings. I know I get all tied up here and the boss gets all over me and everybody seems to be on my case here at the office, but gee, and then it comes out something. Well, at least I have my bowling league. Or at least I'm still a Catholic. Or at least I met that new girl that, I'm crazy about, what's her name? That kind of stuff. Or at least I have my hobby. At least I'll go home and I'll pull my transmission again. Over in Arkansas, that's what some of the unmarried men call it. I don't go into it. I don't go into it. I mean, you'll know it when you see a man go in the bathroom with a copy of Car and Driver. But at any rate, I was not going to stay right here. It's that same old story of there being polarized energy driving the three-dimensional world, no way in, no way out, at the ordinary way in which you can think. And so you have, as always, this kind of feeling of uncertainty. There's nothing strange, nothing wrong. It is the nature that you know that life is alive. To get up, and if you're just an ordinary person, which all of you are ordinary at that level, everyone is, it was born under these conditions, there is a feeling when you get up, the more that you are in just the mainstream of everyday affairs. In the United States of America, let's say, Western Europe, most of the world now, but let's say in the United States, circa June 1991. The more you get up, the more that you're just an ordinary mainstream. I don't mean that you're driving yourself nuts, but you're just getting up and you're just kind of middle class. There is a feeling, the more civilized you are, the more educated, the more sophisticated, and all of the general definitions, the connotations of the terms, there is a feeling as though when you get in the morning that something's pushing on you. People blame it on time, they blame it on, I don't know, it's my ego or it's me trying to get ahead. There is a feel. And it's not primary anymore, you understand. You get up and you may be hungry, but you don't get up going, oh my God, where will I find food? You go in the kitchen, you open the cabinet. That's where you go. You don't have to go and say, well, where's my bow and arrow? I got to sharpen up. The relentless push is not at the primary level. It is at the secondary level. So you have that, and as always, you have a coeval reality that the ordinary intellect, for reasons of electronics and chemistry, all the laws of physics, they cannot hold this awareness simultaneously, but there is a coeval, a parallel, a collateral aspect of this, wherein the intellect, if it was questioned, and it shifts gears, and so wait a minute. And if I was trying to talk to an ordinary intellect, and I said just the kind of stuff I've been saying, and it went, yeah, I know what you mean. There is a kind of, I'd never analyzed it in that way, but I'll buy your story. There is a kind of push. There is a kind of uncertainty, a kind of frantic, if not kinetic energy that seems to be going on. And it is here. You're right. I understand what you're saying. And I said, all right, wait a minute. Oh, do you know what time it is, neighbor? I get them coming a second. I said, oh, by the way, how is it, would you say, I'm talking to ordinary intelligence again, how is it you would say that most people seem to sustain some sort of equilibrium? We having trouble? No. How is it that people seem to just muddle through life and make it, being somewhat sane? You know, how would you explain it? And ordinary intelligence might say, well, you obviously got something up your knickers, your sleeve. What do you mean? And I said, well, would you say that the institutions of man, just all of the trappings of civilization, but what would normally be referred to as the institutions, would you not say that that seems to offer man some sort of harbor? It's almost like a refuge. Are you religious? And the guy could say yes or no. If it's not that, it'd be something else. But if he was sort of religious, I said, well, does that seem to create some sort of anchor in life? And ordinary intelligence, just quite ordinary, sophisticated people, even people who might have been originally Episcopalians even. They might say, well, you know, I don't go to a church anymore, and I'm not very religious, but, you know, yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, my mother was very ill, or I had a close uncle that died. And, I mean, something like that. I'm still not real religious, but when you see somebody, and he was young, he was my age, and he just dropped dead, and you see something like that, and then it goes on. They could go into some kind of psychological description, they could go into something else, but it is as though life has put out some kind of anchor that the intellect believes there is some certainty. It's still not primary. It's like theoretical certainty. It is like that the mind believes, well, we can finally, in essence, to use my extreme examples, which is really pushing it, but they are in essence saying, well, as smart as we are, the kind of progress, the kind of infinite progress of which the mind is obviously capable, which only people limited to three-dimensional consciousness would say that, but they'd say as infinite as the possibilities of mind obviously be, what they're tacitly saying is, well, sooner or later we'll figure out death. I'm just using an extreme example. It is this parallel certainty in the mind that the secondary world offers some certainty, whereas the name of it, may I be biblical? Secondary world, uncertainty, if thy name. Is that biblical or Old English? Uncertainty beeth thy name. Two or three routes from the last few nights and even tonight. Would you also notice along these lines, there was one tonight that pointed out that in a world of finite reality, you cannot spell certainty without what? Misspelling it. Because there is no such tangible creature. There's not, I don't see any great use in staying there because we've hit this kind of area many times in other guises. It is the fact that the intellectual world of man cannot come up with any conclusion that will stand one more iota of questioning. We've been through this before. It simply will not. It's not sarcastic. It's not hostile. It's not cynical. It is the nature of a three-dimensional reality being run by polarized energy. Whew. Maybe I'll just have that stamped and every now or tattooed, and I'll just, you know. But you know what. The point is, there appears to be that a religious person say, well, God will straighten it out, or God is love. A psychologically inclined person will say, we are all subconsciously traumatized. That explains why life is like. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If you could take that kind of subversive analyzation, that is, if you, whoever you are that were hearing this, and you don't have to attack the person who made some statement. You could take their statement and then ask yourself, or you could ask them if they could play the game. If you thought any more than you had to, and if you even take your own information, that you think, oh my God, why is life this way? I can't. And suddenly, a good king comes forward and says, blah, 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 blah. Which you have heard before. That's how you knew that you're you, because that's your king. If you think that much more than you have to, just any more than you have to, and say, well, wait a minute, that's all right. Remember, we're talking about a kind of non-sequential, in fact, non-existent at that level, subversive analyzation, no hostility, no preference, if you just say, well, wait a minute. And you ask one more question, it collapses. It's just the nature of it. It will turn back on itself. You're asking polarized energy to take a third stance, and it cannot. It makes a statement which is correct. It says it's correct. Let's say it is. It's got to be one or the other, so let's say it's correct. But it can only be correct. It can only be true at the expense of some other possibility, its apparent opposite, being untrue. And what you're asking is, you walked again into that great non-existent cosmic Bastard and Robbins we've talked about, and they have chocolate and vanilla. And you say, well, that's very interesting. I will take a banana. The place is going to blow up. Well, it's not really. They're going to blow you up. It will not work. It is simply the nature of the ice cream business. I mean reality. You cannot spell certainty. You apparently can. If you could not apparently do so, may I suggest right quick, the secondary world, if people could think any more than they do, the secondary world would be the subject of extreme ridicule. There would be people trying to jump ship. Don't ask me how you jump ship out of reality, but by God, people would be trying. For those of you who do not remember, although it got a laugh, at one time as the ship was going, it was a Cairo. As the ship was sinking, the captain had the second mate pacing up and down the deck as best he could at that angle, saying 3 bells and all's well, because the captain said that the passengers paid darn good money for this trip, and at least they deserved a positive attitude from the crew. Could I have either vanilla or drowned? You got your choice. No matter how you spell certainty, you cannot go back to yourself. That is, you cannot think any more than you have to. Once you spell certainty, whatever it was spelled, G-O-D, D-R-U-G-S, J-A-C-K, D-A-N-I-E-L-S, S-C-X. Well, I shouldn't drag that in. No matter how you still spell certainty, in secondary affairs, if you say, okay, and you ask one more time, well, wait a minute, didn't you misspell it? It falls apart. Because if you think any more than you have to about whatever it is in the secondary world, it will not hold up. You're asking for banana, and all they got is chocolate and vanilla. That's it. There's nothing wrong. There's nobody to blame. That's it. But the mind does not believe that. It's the efficiency. Because you go in, it says, Bastard and Robbins, infinite flavors. Forget all that 31 flavors. That's just around these parts. What it really says, I know it. You think it says it, but what it says is infinite flavors. Because all you got to do is go back to your old level, go back to your own hovels, go back to your own, where you are your own serf. And I don't mean anything to do with fun till your daddy takes your T-bird away. I mean the kind of serf of you're down there groveling around thinking knowledge is power, which is you're believing secondary worlds, secondary affairs is power. If you go back there and you ask any question about what they spelled, how it was spelled, it falls apart. But you think that you can go into Bastard and Robbins, and you think it says infinite flavors. Because in the same way, shall we even stoop this low? The digitalizing of analog information and all information in today's three-dimensional world seems to be infinite. That you can take on and off pulse of electricity, and you can count as high as a human mind can ever conceive. You can do every letter of every alphabet. So you could say, well, on the basis of an on and off switch in a computer, you can do anything, at least you can file, you can spell anything that the human mind can spell. And so it seems to be the big I. It seems to be infinite. Forget whether it's actually approaching human intelligence and all that. It just seems to be an infinite storehouse of possibilities. Because without any doubt, anything that the ordinary mind can think about, you can file in that mother, and they'll come back, right? So that's the same thing as believing. You go into Bastard and Robbins, and you think they got any flavor you can think of. Because if you say, well, let's say that you suddenly made up a flavor. You're trying to check it out, and you say, do you have burnt rubber orange sherbet? All right, see, well, I tried to make it sound like you would laugh, but now wait a minute. If somebody can make it up, you understand it can be done. Which is part of the efficient basis of asking the whole idea to point out to people, wait, there are limits to what you can think at the ordinary level. And a sincere person will go, all right, wait a minute. And they go, well, there's not. In fact, I can prove it to you, says an ordinary person. I even considered what you just said. I ran it through. That there's any limit. If there was a limit, that would hit me in some way, and there's not a limit. Because I can even think, hey, there's a limit to what I can think. There is proof itself. Huh? No matter how you spell certainty, you misspell it. And yet the ordinary intellect takes the misspelling of certainty as being certainty itself. It's just simply that you can't ask it any more questions. Not because that ordinary people are dumb or misled, you simply can't do it. You are dealing with everybody's intellect, including your own. You're saying, could I have burnt rubber, orange sherbet? And all I got is chocolate and vanilla. That's it. But you think, well, I thought of that. I know it's silly and I just made it up, but hell, if I made it up, you could have it. A little bit of something else that Kyrute drug out tonight. In this kind of relentless press, in this kind of vigor of man's secondary, the growth of his intellectual world, in such a way, this relentless, this never ceasing press is such that an ordinary man's kingdom here seems to be populated. The subjects seem to be rather scattered, loose, apparently almost unrelated. Such as, if you want to jump back out here right quick, jump back. And if you're out here and you're a king and you're looking down, the poor old peons, the little suffs and the little sufferettes. I mean, you look down at the common folk. Let's say we're talking about a king who has a certain amount of charitable instincts. And he looks down and he thinks, oh, look at them little dears. I mean, they're all poor, they're uneducated, they run around like half the time they don't know what they're doing. Oh, bless their little hearts. Oh, bless their little. Now, screw a king and all that, because that's just a bad reflection. That's a bad movie of this. A man's ordinary subjects at the neural level seem to be that kind of undisciplined, uneducated, even if you're educated. Very scattered. They can't seem to pull themselves together. I mean, they're in a village, but to call them some kind of coherent group is real iffy. You could say it, but it takes usually something extreme to happen out there, in the kind of level I'm talking about, to pull together anything that seems to be a uniformity of purpose, which out there is why so constantly kings, those apparently in charge, continue to rattle sabers and to say our neighbors are going to get us. Now, try your best really to forget all this thing about kings and people. It is in here the way that a man's intellect just normally develops. His thoughts, his subjects, the submissive part seems generally to be so loosely connected, at times almost unrelated. You just know one thing about this, one thing about that, and somebody can give you a drink or turn your head this way, and you'll come up with what appears to be or sound like a whole different opinion than you expressed 5 minutes ago, or somebody says, wait a minute, now we're talking about economics over here a few minutes ago, and you said blah, 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 and now suddenly we start talking about the arts. And did you hear what you just said? You just made an ass of yourself. You just contradicted yourself. course, then hopefully you can call upon your memory of Walt Whitman. Do I contradict myself? And if you remember that whole quote, you make it out like to be, hi, that shows what a superior mind I have. Which, at least you think that means too much. Just remember this. Walt died. Okay. Plus he had a funny hat. Back to where we were, this kind of looseness, this kind of almost non-nationalistic feel of a man's thoughts, not due to some flaw on your part, where something that you're just ordinary and that your physical makeup or your higher brain operations are intact. It is due to this relentless press, this ever-changing secondary world of man, that amidst all of that, what you have life doing. And when the Kairos Night was pointed out of kind of an institutionalized version of thinking, but it's to run both of these stories about out there and in here together, it is as though life in everyone sets upon your secondary throne a fanatical tyrant, normally thought of as being one's individual sense of self. What seems to be one's I, what seems to be your personality, is in essence a kind of fanatic. Of course, you're dumb enough, I guess, that is, you're ordinary enough, you could think that in some way that, yes, I am captain of my fat. I knew you were going to say that again. I am a self-made man, which, and that takes a lot of guts to say that. Unless, of course, you're Walt Whitman. You could look upon just an ordinary person. You're feeling that, let's assume you're ordinary, you're sane, you pass for being ordinary and sane. There's like a core, there is like a throne in the secondary world, not the primary. Let's still assume that just genetically you're in reasonable shape. You're going to live and there's nothing really wrong with you genetically in the brain. A way in which you could think about what seems to be people's individuality is almost like a tyrant, like a fanatic. And don't carry the connotations too far if there's something dangerous about fanaticism. What I mean is that you seem to be certain about who you are. There seems to be a kind of stability to you. That people meet you one day and then the next day you're more or less the same. You might not have enough sleep, or you ate too much, or you're not feeling good, but you're the sort that if somebody talks to you a few minutes and they don't know you that well, they say, well, are you all right? And you go, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know what you mean. I got indigestion. That is, there seems to be a kind of stability, a kind of certainty, a kind of predictability. But now you start carrying that. Again, try and drop any pejorative patina to this. But you start moving that just a little further, and it becomes a kind of fanaticism. Not in a negative sense, but a kind of fanaticism, a certainty. But that king, that tyrant, as well loved as he is by you if you're ordinary, that is, that you love being sane, somewhat stable. If you can now jump beyond the ordinary level of that, you got to face up to it. You did not put that sucker on the throne. It's as though one day you kind of woke up, your hormones got fairly well satisfied, and you could drop your subscription to Car and Driver. And it's like you suddenly are somebody. When you quit being a real irritating teenager or kid, it's like, well, I guess now I know who I am. Now I've sort of found myself. It is like now there's some stability to me. But you did not put it there. You didn't have any choice, nothing wrong with it. But to believe that, yes, I am responsible for what I think. I am responsible for my secondary world. That you should be all in favor of, but that is the nature of the ordinary world. That is the nature of the civilized secondary world. And it's got nothing to do with any increased understanding, because contrary, not good or bad, there's nowhere to look. No parents to look for, no bad alignment of planets when you were born. There is, in a sense, a tyrant if you're sane and stable. has been put on the throne. That is the core of your secondary intellectual world. But he was put there by life. He had to be. Or else you would be on a non-humorous funny farm. You would not be one of the great middle class. You would not be ordinary. It requires that there be a kind of intellectual fanaticism. It requires that there be a kind of tyranny in everyone. Not political, screw all that. It's here. Anybody in life that apparently, just think about people you know, your family probably, your mother and father, just people that seem to be just kind of middle of the road, ordinary people. You can count on them. Maybe you don't like all their habits, but at least they're consistent. You know who they are. You don't walk in one day and they're wearing funny nose and glasses and putting their hands on the VCR and trying to heal their electrical bills. They're sane. They're sane. There's a certainty to them. But in another way, it is a kind of intellectual fanaticism, which is necessary. If you want to, which I know you do, okay, well, let's go ahead. Oh, well, if you want to get really naughty along this area, how about this? How about consider along these same boundaries where we're talking about these neural building sites, right past this ordinary place, along the same lines that we're verbally mapping out. Consider that a revolutionist, a kind of possible use of this information in this situation, and a kind of new approach. To wit, to be certain but with no specifics or preferences. Take that, all of you sane people. To be certain, which we've already pointed out is necessary in life. If you're ordinary in life, you've got no choice. If you're sane, there is a kind of certainty. It's known as having a stable personality. But consider this, the same situation, which you were born in the city, you were born there, but to understand the situation here and to see, well, that is the way it works, then a new approach in a place, this does not fit on any three-dimensional map, but I said it once, so I'll say it again. A kind of certainty, but a certainty that has no specifics and no preferences. I think he speaks for many of you. The fellow said he didn't want to think about it. Hey, fine by me. Another Kairoot tonight. Where was it the other night? It said that there's no way out of a punching bag. Yeah, it was the other night. For some of you who kind of reacted however it is you react, like, I bet some of you thought there was no way out of that Kairoot. Like, it made me react, but geez, boy, here's finally one that just like, you remember that letter writer that wrote in and said that he was convinced that these things don't make sense and I was doing it, or that Kairoot was doing them on purpose just so they wouldn't make sense. And he asked, did Kairoot have any advice? Because he couldn't quit watching and thinking about them, even though they didn't make any sense, and he just knew that it was purposeful. And he closed by saying, please advise and please stop it. There is no way out of a punching bag. If you could tie this to the other one that we still haven't left completely, that being that in the secondary world, the factual world, so long as anything, any fact can only be true, as is the case, at the expense of some other fact, its apparent opposite being untrue, then as long as that is the situation, then there's no end to this. Now, if you put all those together, you could look at it this way, that a polar-based intellectual world is a mental life lived in a punching bag. Notice, is that supposed to be some show of finality, or is that a plea for, If your intellectual world, you or anybody's, is based still, limited to a polarized reality, then your secondary world, your intellectual life, is lived inside of a punching bag. I mean, you don't have to worry about Big Ed's gym. We're going over somewhere. You got a living example inside of your own head. The punching bag is like this, inside the head, based upon polarized intellectual reality. It's like in your own head you have the primo living example of the old 1-2. It's like first you're hit with a right cross. We'll make it all one term, hyphenated, print, quotation mark. You're hit with a right cross, true fact. But then it's followed up very shortly by a left jab. This is probably not correct. That was all you understand, one term. But then it can be a left jab, still quotation marks, hyphenated, quotation mark. Left jab, this was not true, but now by God it's beginning to look more and more like it could be correct in the quotation marks. You see? You don't have to go into training anywhere. You don't have to put up with those terrible rank odors over at Big Ed's gym. It's in here. But just think, once you see it, that you and everyone else at the ordinary level, as you're supposed to, sit around, puff on pipes, wear tweed coats, go to school, then go to school some more, and ponder. Well, let's see. I have just been hit with a right cross, and now I will take it on my other frontal lobe with a good left jab. Now, in the world, in the secondary world, that works, or else we would not have air conditioning. You would not have automatic transmissions. You would not have a restroom. You would not have magazines to which you subscribe for your hobby. It is quite efficient. But consider, well, I'll figure out what's going on here. That does not sound familiar. That does not feel familiar. That is simply it. But in the world, in what appears to be, and what is, within these to find out reality, what is a kind of progress, is based upon a right jab, a left hook, a right cross, a left hook. You're living in a punching bag. It's a very healthy punching bag now. There's nothing wrong. That is part of the relentless push of life's health. It's the constant 0-1-2. If the right cross don't work, the left jab will. No matter what kind of critique you may have as a boxing reporter. It is without fail, because if this fact don't work, the other one will. If the right jab doesn't get you, the left hook will. It's not open to question. There's nothing to think about. It's simply that, well, I was mistaken about this, but now I see the light. But then later what? Later you may go back to school and you may even become more what? Enlightened. That is, you may get hit again. But it's still limited to this. It's the old 1-2. Or, those of you that seemed to get a few nights ago, if it ain't one thing, it's another. That is, if it ain't one fact, it's the other fact. That is, if this fact is not dominating its apparent opposite, then you don't save your time. You don't have to go to school. I'll tell you right quick. If this fact, whatever it is not dominating its apparent opposite, the other one's dominating it. Oh, rats, I gave it away. It's the old 1-2. Or back to the cow root, there is no way out of a punching bag. All right, let's see if we can tie some of this up, since we've got almost 4 inches left. No, that's 4 feet. Can you tie up, as long as one fact can only be true within a polarized driven three-dimensional reality, as long as only one is a fact can only be true at the expense of some other fact, normally its apparent opposite, being untrue, then there is no way out of this. That was the full chi root that we never did get around to thrashing, and so watch it. Here it comes. We'll wrap it up. That there is no way out of this. That was the way the chi root went, was it not? As long as one fact can only be true at the expense of another fact being untrue, there is no way out of this. Longer version of there's no way out of a punching bag. But back to this one, since we never did really cover it. A, small a, parentheses, dash. You ever notice how inexpensive it is to try and sound intelligent? And how often people will accept it? If you say, well, all right, I'd like to break this down into at least 3 stages. If we would mark, the first point I'd like to make is A. You know, I'll give it, all you have pen and paper, I'll wait a second. Everybody, they write A. You feel like you did something. At any rate. Small a, I said, as a matter of fact. As long as one fact can only be true at the expense of another one being untrue, there's no way out of this. There's no end to this. All right, there is no end to the factual questions, the doubts, and the uncertainties. That is, there is no end to the relentless press of life's health. Small b, parentheses, dash. As long as there's no end to this, there is no end to intellectual human life. Or C, or 3 asterisks and a dash. And that is, so long as you can't come to a definitive factual conclusion, you can't come to the end of the road. Or, high old silver and happy trails to you. Fade out to the Roy Rogers promo. All right, listen. Say, all you people out there in other cities, something that I tried to get people to do some time back, and maybe it's a better time now. You don't have to send it to me. You can if you'd like to, but I would like for you to do something. Even those that you who heard it a long time ago, try and sit down for some reasonable length of, page or whatever you want to do. And first off, make yourself up a new name. Just to you, don't tell anybody. Make yourself up a new name and then write, make up the facts, of course. They can be a little related, but write a biography of you under this other name. If nothing else, just a bare skeleton of the facts. All your progress, and what you've done, overcome, and all your problems. And, Don't use your name, though. Tut, no. Now, you could use your name like as a middle name to whoever you take on. Just a suggestion. Now, I'll see you over at the Gabby Hayes convention. Hey, some people out of town. We don't have to fade. Just cut them off.